Before we drift into this ancient story, if you find comfort in these tales, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to Sleep Powder Stories. Your support helps these gentle narratives for gamers reach others who need them. Thank you for being here. There was a time before names, before borders drawn across continents or islands separated by oceans, before trainers walked roads with purpose or cities hummed with electric light. The world existed then as it exists now, breathing slowly, moving without urgency, completely unbothered by what would come next. The air was different in those early days, not cleaner or purer in any moral sense, but lighter somehow. As if the atmosphere itself was still learning what it meant to hold clouds, to carry rain from one place to another, to push wind gently through valleys that had only just formed. Everything felt new, but also impossibly old, like waking from a dream you cannot quite remember, but know you have dreamed before. Jungles stretched endlessly across lands that would someday be called continents. These were not the jungles travelers would later write about, catalogued and mapped with trails marked carefully for safe passage. These were forests that moved according to their own logic, where trees grew without pattern, where vines wrapped around trunks that had stood for centuries, and where sunlight filtered through layers of canopy in ways that made every afternoon feel like dusk. Water covered much of everything else, not violently, not crashing against shores with foam and fury, but resting. Oceans breathed in and out with tides that no one observed, waves rolling forward and pulling back in rhythms older than measurement. Beneath those surfaces, entire worlds existed in silence. Coral formations built themselves slowly over lifetimes. Schools of creatures moved together without leaders. Everything simply was. In this world, Pokémon existed. They were not organized into types yet. No one had written their names in journals or sketched their shapes for reference. They moved through forests, swam through oceans, burrowed beneath soil, and drifted through skies, each one occupying space without claiming it. There was no hierarchy then, no legendary status or common classification. A creature that swam was no more or less important than one that flew. Power existed, certainly, but power without purpose is just energy waiting to be shaped. Some Pokémon were large, moving slowly across open plains that had never felt footsteps before. Others were small, tucked into crevices between rocks, or nested in the highest branches where wind moved constantly. Each existed according to its nature. Battles happened occasionally, brief exchanges of strength that ended as quickly as they began, neither victor nor defeated leaving with anything more than they had arrived with. Mostly, though, Pokémon simply lived. They ate when hungry, rested when tired, and moved when movement felt right. The world hummed with a kind of quiet awareness. Not consciousness in the way we understand it, but something older. A sense that everything happening had happened before and would happen again. Seasons changed without announcement. Days lengthened and shortened. Rain fell when clouds grew heavy. None of it required explanation. And somewhere in all of this, drifting through spaces between trees or floating just above water that reflected nothing, was Mew. Mew was not discovered then because discovery requires a discoverer, and there were no researchers yet, no teams venturing into jungles with equipment and notebooks and theories to prove. Mew simply existed the way morning mist exists, present and observable but never quite graspable. It moved through the world not as a traveler moves with destination in mind, but as air moves through an open window, filling space naturally, unbothered by walls or boundaries. If you had been there in those early days, standing in a jungle clearing where light fell in soft columns through leaves, you might have seen Mew without realizing what you were seeing. a flash of soft color passing between branches, a shape that seemed mammalian but also something else, something not quite definable. You might have blinked and convinced yourself it was nothing, just a trick of light, just your eyes adjusting to shadow and sun competing for the same space. Mew did not announce itself. It did not land with weight that bent branches or disturbed ground. It drifted, always drifting, as though gravity itself had forgotten to apply its rules consistently. Pink fur, if you were close enough to notice, though pink is a word that would come later, a label applied by minds that needed language to process color. In those early days, Mew was simply the color it was, and the color was soft, warmer than white, lighter than red, neither bright nor dull, but something in between, something that seemed to shift slightly depending on how light touched it. Its eyes, large and blue, observed everything with a kind of gentle curiosity, not the sharp focus of a predator watching prey, or the nervous alertness of prey watching for predators. Something calmer. Mew looked at the world the way a child looks at something familiar but endlessly interesting. Trees that had stood in the same place for decades were still worth observing. Water flowing over rocks, repeating the same motion infinitely, remained somehow fascinating. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the call of a creature in the distance, the crack of a branch giving way to age, all of it registered as part of the world's ongoing conversation with itself. Mew's body was small, compact in a way that suggested efficiency rather than limitation. A long tail extended behind it, tapering to a rounded tip that moved in slow waves as Mew floated through air or water. Its paws, small and delicate, seemed almost unnecessary given how rarely Mew touched ground. 3 fingers on each, tipped with gentle curves rather than claws, meant for gripping or tearing. These were not the paws of something that fought for survival. These were the paws of something that existed beside survival, rather than within its constant pressure. When Mew moved, it moved without sound. No footsteps, no rustling of displaced air, no warning of approach. It simply appeared where it had not been moments before, having crossed distance without seeming to travel. This was not invisibility in any dramatic sense. Mew did not vanish or flicker in and out of perception. It simply moved in ways that eyes struggled to track, slipping between moments rather than through them. There were days, long stretches of them, where Mew would rest in treetops far above ground. Not sleeping exactly, though something like sleep. A state of floating awareness where the world continued around it, and Mew remained conscious enough to notice, but not engaged enough to respond. Leaves moved in wind. Insects crawled along bark. Birds nested nearby, chirping softly to hatchlings too young to fly. Mew observed all of this without interfering, without even thinking to interfere. Observation was enough. Other times, Mew descended to ground level, though rarely for long. The earth felt too solid beneath paws that preferred floating. Grass bent under weight that barely registered. Mew would pause there, crouched low, watching ants carry fragments of leaves towards their nests, hidden in soil. Entire civilizations of small creatures operating with coordination that seemed impossible without language, yet they managed perfectly well, moving as one organism composed of thousands of tiny bodies. Mew would tilt its head slightly, studying the lines they formed, the way they navigated obstacles, the determination in movement, too small to seem significant, yet somehow essential. Then, just as quietly as it had arrived, Mew would lift back into air, leaving the ants to their work, undisturbed and unaware that something had been watching them at all. Water drew Mew frequently. oceans, rivers, lakes, anywhere water collected and moved according to its nature. Mew would float just above surfaces, close enough that its reflection appeared below, creating two Mews where only one existed. The reflection moved in perfect synchronization, following movements that seemed random but somehow felt deliberate. A slow circle above still water, a drift along a river current without touching the flow. A pause above ocean waves that rolled endlessly toward shores that would someday have names. Beneath those surfaces, entire ecosystems functioned in darkness or filtered light. Pokémon with bodies designed for pressure and cold moved through depths where no sunlight had ever reached. They hunted or hid or simply drifted, suspended in spaces between seafloor and surface, existing in a layer of ocean that felt like its own separate world. Mew would sometimes descend into those waters, not swimming exactly, but moving through liquid as easily as it moved through air. Down where pressure should have been crushing, where cold should have been unbearable. Mew moved comfortably, observing creatures that observed it back, with eyes adapted to seeing in almost no light at all. These underwater Pokémon did not flee from Mew. They did not approach either. They simply acknowledged its presence, the way one acknowledges a cloud passing overhead, noticed but not concerning. Mew was part of the world in the same way they were, neither threat nor opportunity, just another shape moving through shared space. After a time, Mew would ascend again, breaking through the surface without creating ripples, returning to air that felt thinner, but somehow more welcoming. Jungles remained Mew's most frequent home, though home is perhaps too permanent a word for somewhere Mew visited without ever truly arriving. The density of life in those jungles was overwhelming. Every surface hosted something growing or crawling or waiting. Vines thick as arms wrapped around trees that had supported them for so long, the two had grown together, inseparable now, one organism instead of two. Flowers bloomed in explosions of color that would have seemed impossible if you had not seen them yourself. Birds with plumage brighter than seemed reasonable called to each other in languages composed entirely of rhythm and tone. Mew moved through all of this without disturbing any of it. It would float past Pokémon that noticed it without alarm. A large creature with thick skin and eyes that suggested ancient wisdom might glance up as Mew passed overhead, watch for a moment, then return its attention to the leaves it had been eating, each mouthful requiring patient chewing and slow swallowing. A smaller creature, darting between bushes in search of berries or insects, might pause as Mew drifted past, its own eyes tracking the movement briefly before deciding the floating shape was not worth further investigation. None of them seemed bothered by Mew's presence. None of them approached with curiosity or fled with fear. Mew simply was, and they simply were, and existence continued around all of them, without requiring anything more complicated than being. There were moments, rare ones, where Mew would settle onto a branch and remain there for hours, not sleeping, not quite awake, existing in that space between where thoughts move slowly and nothing demands immediate response. The branch would support Mew's slight weight without bending noticeably. Leaves around it would continue their slow dance with wind. Shadows would shift as sun moved across sky. Time passed in the way it always passes, steadily and without concern for who is measuring it. During these long pauses, Mew's eyes would half close, not shutting out the world but softening its edges. Everything became gentler that way. Sounds seemed further away even when they were close. Light felt warmer even when it had not changed temperature. The constant hum of life, insects buzzing, leaves rustling, water moving somewhere in the distance, all of it blended into a single sustained note that felt less like noise and more like the world reminding itself that it was still here, still functioning, still breathing in its slow, patient way. Occasionally, other Pokémon would pass beneath where Mew rested. They would move through undergrowth or fly between trees, each focused on whatever task currently occupied them. Finding food, seeking shelter, escaping something, or approaching something else. Their lives were filled with these small missions, each one vital in the moment. None of them remembered once completed. Mew watched them without judging, without comparing their urgent movements to its own stillness. Both were valid, both were necessary, both were simply different ways of existing in the same world. When Mew finally moved again, lifting off the branch with a movement so slight it barely qualified as effort, it would drift in a new direction, never following the same path twice, never seeming to have a destination in mind. It moved because movement felt right, because staying still had stopped feeling necessary, because some internal compass had shifted slightly and suggested that elsewhere might be interesting. The concept of elsewhere was strange in those days before maps. Elsewhere was not a distance measured or a location named. It was simply not here, and not here could be anywhere that was not the current position. Mew embraced this fully. It did not plan routes or avoid certain areas or seek out specific locations. It moved where movement took it, stopping when stopping felt appropriate, continuing when continuation seemed more interesting than remaining. Sometimes Mew would encounter other Pokémon in ways that required closer interaction. A creature sleeping in a tree hollow might open its eyes to find Mew floating nearby, observing. The creature would blink slowly, processing this presence, deciding it posed no danger, and return to sleep without alarm. Mew would watch a moment longer, noting the creature's peaceful expression, the way its body had curled into the smallest possible shape to fit the available space. The efficiency of sleep, when you trust the world enough to close your eyes completely. Other times, Mew would cross paths with Pokémon that were actively engaged in something. Two creatures facing each other, bodies tense, eyes locked, preparing for a battle that would determine territory or status or simply prove strength for its own sake. Mew would pause nearby, hovering at a safe distance, watching as they clashed. The impact of bodies meeting, the sound of contact, the dance of attack and defense, all of it unfolded with a kind of brutal grace. Neither combatant noticed Mew watching. They were too focused on each other, too committed to the immediate moment to spare attention for a floating observer. When the battle ended, one Pokémon retreating, the other remaining, both exhausted, both having proven whatever needed proving, Mew would linger briefly. It would observe the victor catching its breath, the defeated limping away, neither looking particularly triumphant or defeated, despite their assigned roles. Then Mew would drift away, having witnessed something fundamental about how certain creatures established order, but not feeling compelled to participate in that particular method of organization. Mew's own strength was not something it tested or displayed. It existed the way water exists in a lake, present and powerful but only apparent when something requires it. There were moments, rare ones, where Mew would move in ways that suggested capability far beyond what its small body implied. A quick burst of speed that left no sound or disruption, but covered vast distance in an instant. A subtle manipulation of energy that caused a falling object to slow gently rather than crash. A presence that somehow calmed an agitated Pokémon without any visible action, just the sense that Mew was nearby, and therefore things were balanced. These displays were never intentional in the way a demonstration is intentional. Mew did not perform strength to impress or intimidate. The strength simply existed as part of what Mew was, emerging naturally when circumstances aligned, then receding back into potential once the moment passed. It was strength without ego, power without purpose, capability without the need to prove capability. The genetic composition of Mew, though no one understood this yet, held something unique. Within its small body resided potential waiting to become specific. The ability to reflect other forms, to learn movements it had never been taught, to adapt without conscious decision. This was not learned or developed. It simply was, the same way some Pokémon could breathe underwater and others could generate fire from internal heat. Mew's gift was flexibility, the capacity to become without ceasing to be itself. When Mew observed other Pokémon, something within it absorbed information without trying. A bird taking flight would demonstrate a particular method of wing movement, and Mew would understand it completely, not intellectually, but instinctively. A creature manipulating water to create a protective barrier would reveal principles of flow and force, and Mew would internalize those principles without realizing it had learned anything at all. Every observation added to an internal library that Mew neither organized nor referenced consciously. The knowledge simply existed, available when needed, dormant when not. There were times when Mew would rest on mountainsides, high above jungles and oceans, where air grew thin and cold and few Pokémon ventured. These mountains had been shaped over periods of time longer than language could describe, pushed up from Earth's interior by forces that still moved beneath crust too thick to see through. Their peaks reached toward clouds that passed without stopping, hurried along by winds that never quite ceased. Up there, Mew would sit on rocks that had never been warmed by full sun, their surfaces too high, too exposed, too angled to hold heat for long. The world below appeared vast from these heights. Jungles became green expanses, broken by rivers that reflected sky. Oceans stretched to horizons that curved slightly, revealing the planet's roundness in ways that ground-level observers could never notice. Everything looked smaller from up here, and in looking smaller, everything seemed somehow more connected, pieces of a single landscape rather than separated territories. Mew would remain still during these mountain visits, letting wind push against its small body without moving it, demonstrating a weight that seemed impossible for something so light. Its eyes would track clouds as they passed, each one unique in shape but identical in nature, all composed of the same water suspended in air, all temporary, all inevitable. Some clouds moved quickly, driven by winds Mew could not see. Others drifted slowly, almost seeming to stand still against blue backdrop. Birds occasionally passed at these heights, their bodies designed for altitudes that would suffocate land-dwelling creatures. They would glance at Mew with brief curiosity, recognize something that was not prey or predator or competitor, and continue their routes without altering course. Mew watched them go, noting how effortlessly they owned this space, how their wings carved through thin air with movements precise enough to maintain altitude despite reduced oxygen and increasing cold. When Mew descended from these mountains, it did so slowly, spiraling downward in lazy circles that followed no particular logic, simply enjoying the transition from thin air to thick, from cold to warm, from sparse to abundant. The world grew louder as altitude decreased. Sounds that had been muted or absent returned. Insects resumed their constant hum. Leaves rustled with renewed clarity. Water moved audibly again. By the time Mew reached lower elevations, the mountain visit had already begun to feel like a memory, something experienced but already distant. Nighttime brought its own rhythm to the world. Creatures that had been active during daylight retreated into nests or burrows or hollow trees, finding safety in darkness by removing themselves from open spaces. Others emerged for the first time since sunset the previous day. Bodies adapted for low light, eyes that functioned better without brightness, senses that relied on sound or smell or subtle vibrations rather than vision. Mew experienced night without distinguishing it from day in any meaningful way. Darkness was not an obstacle or a danger. It was simply a different quality of light, less direct but still present, reflected from moon or stars or the faint glow that sometimes appeared in certain plants or insects. Mew moved through darkness as easily as through daylight, floating between trees that were now only silhouettes, crossing water that had turned from blue to black, drifting over sleeping Pokémon that trusted the night enough to lower their defenses completely. There was something particularly peaceful about the nighttime world. Even creatures that were active moved with less urgency. Predators hunted with patience rather than aggression. Prey remained cautious but not panicked. Everything proceeded at a slower pace, as if the absence of sun had reduced all activity to half speed, allowing more time for careful movement, thoughtful response, deliberate action. Mew would sometimes float above sleeping Pokémon, observing them in their most vulnerable state. A large creature sprawled across ground that barely contained its bulk, breathing in deep, steady rhythms that moved its entire body with each inhale and exhale. Smaller creatures clustered together for warmth, their bodies pressed tight, barely distinguishable as individuals, rather than a single mass of fur or scales or feathers. All of them deep in whatever dreams filled the minds of creatures that did not use language to process experience. Did they dream? Did their sleep contain images or sensations or replays of daily events? Mew could not know, and did not wonder in any way that required answers. Their sleep was peaceful. That seemed sufficient. Whether consciousness continued in altered form or ceased entirely until morning made no practical difference to their rest. As nights progressed toward dawn, the world prepared for transition without announcement. Birds began stirring before light appeared, their internal clocks somehow synchronized with sun still below horizon. Nocturnal creatures completed final hunts or returned to shelter before brightness made them visible to threats. Flowers that had closed at dusk began the slow process of reopening, petals uncurling incrementally, ready to catch first light when it finally arrived. Mew witnessed these transitions often, floating in spaces between night and day, watching the world shift from one state to another. The first hint of light appeared not as direct sun, but as a gradual reduction of darkness, sky changing from black to deep blue to lighter blue, to colors that had no simple names, purple mixed with orange, pink that existed only briefly before being overwhelmed by full brightness. When sun finally cleared the horizon, its light touched elevated surfaces first. Mountain peaks glowed briefly before valleys received any illumination. Tree canopies caught early rays, while forest floors remained dim. This gradual spreading of light created temporary divisions, separating world into layers of brightness and shadow that would not equalize until sun reached its full height. Mew never greeted dawn or celebrated day's arrival. These were transitions the world made constantly, neither special nor routine, simply part of how time progressed. But there was something pleasant about being present for these moments, about existing in the space where night became day without fuss or ceremony, about watching a world wake up slowly, section by section, creature by creature, each one rousing when internal timing suggested waking rather than when external force demanded it. The concept of time itself was strange in those early days. No one marked seasons with names or counted years in numbered sequence. Time existed only as the present extending backward into past and forward into future. Both directions equally vague, neither requiring precise measurement. Things happened before other things. Events would happen after current moments. That was sufficient structure for a world that did not need schedules or calendars or any system more complex than observing whether it was light or dark, warm or cold, wet or dry. Mu existed within this timeless time comfortably. It did not age in any visible way. Its body remained constant, never growing larger or weaker, never showing signs of wear that accumulating experience usually leaves. Days became weeks, became months, became years, all flowing past without leaving marks. Mu was not immortal in any supernatural sense, but time touched it differently, passing over rather than through, acknowledging its presence without demanding anything in return. There were Pokémon Mu encountered repeatedly, recognizing them not by name, but by presence. A particular creature that always rested near a certain river bend, another that nested in the same tree cluster, returning each season to the same branches. These were not friends in any conventional sense. Mu and these recurring presences never interacted in ways that suggested relationship. They simply occupied overlapping territories, crossing paths often enough that recognition became natural. Sometimes these familiar Pokémon would have changed between encounters. A creature that had been alone now traveled with offspring, small versions of itself that mimicked its movements clumsily, learning how to be what they already were. A pair that had once been separate now moved together, coordinated in ways that suggested partnership or bonding. Others disappeared entirely, their usual spots now occupied by different Pokémon, or simply empty, the reason for their absence unknown and ultimately irrelevant. Mu observed these changes without attachment. It felt no loss when familiar presences ceased appearing, no particular joy when new life emerged from old. These were movements within the constant flow, variations in pattern that made the pattern interesting without disrupting its fundamental nature. Everything changed constantly, while somehow remaining essentially the same. The concept of purpose never troubled Mu. It did not wonder why it existed or what it was meant to do. Purpose implied direction, goals, endpoints to reach, or objectives to complete. Mu had none of these. It existed because it existed, moved because movement felt natural, observed because observation was inherent to consciousness. There was no deeper meaning to pursue, no ultimate reason to uncover. Being was its own justification. This lack of purpose created a particular kind of freedom. Without goals to achieve, there was no failure to fear. Without destinations to reach, there was no urgency to hurry. Without meaning to discover, there was no frustration at ambiguity. Mu simply floated through existence, moment to moment, experience to experience, each one complete in itself, none requiring connection to anything larger. Sometimes Mu would follow other Pokémon for extended periods, not stalking them but drifting behind them, observing their routines. A creature that spent days gathering materials for nest building, making countless trips back and forth, each time carrying another component, each piece carefully placed according to instinct refined over countless generations. The nest slowly took shape, becoming structure where before there had been only scattered materials. Mew would watch this process from beginning to end sometimes, seeing the completed nest emerge from careful accumulation. Other times, Mew would drift away mid-process, the nest still incomplete, its final form unknown. Neither approach was better or worse. Completion was satisfying when witnessed, but incompletion left no sense of dissatisfaction. The process itself had been the interesting part. The end result simply one more static thing in a world full of static things that had once been processes before they finished. Other Pokémon moved without apparent purpose, similar to Mew's own wandering. Creatures that seemed to travel for travel's sake, following routes that looped or zigzagged or simply extended outward until turning back felt right. Mew would sometimes parallel these wanderers, maintaining distance but moving in approximate synchronization. Two purposeless journeys happening simultaneously in adjacent spaces. Neither acknowledged the other's presence directly, yet somehow their movements coordinated loosely, turning when the other turned, pausing when the other paused, continuing when continuation seemed natural to both. These unplanned parallels would last hours sometimes, both Pokémon drifting through territory without destination, until eventually one of them diverged, pulled by some internal impulse toward a different direction, breaking the synchronization as casually as it had formed. Mew would continue alone then, unbothered by the separation, having enjoyed the temporary company without needing it to continue. Rain arrived periodically without warning that most creatures could interpret. Clouds would gather gradually, thickening until they blocked sun completely, turning day into premature twilight. Then water would begin falling, first as isolated drops that struck leaves with audible impact, then as steady streams that filled air with sound and motion, finally as overwhelming downpours that obscured vision and made everything beyond immediate surroundings appear vague and uncertain. Mew did not shelter from rain. Water passed over its fine fur without soaking through, beading on the surface briefly before rolling off, leaving Mew dry despite being surrounded by water. It would float through rainstorms unbothered, watching how other creatures responded. Some sought immediate cover, ducking into hollows or beneath large leaves, or into caves that stayed dry even when everything else was drenched. Others remained exposed, either accepting the rain as temporary discomfort or genuinely unbothered by being wet. The sound of rain created its own kind of peace. Everything else became quiet or was drowned out completely. Individual raindrops hitting individual surfaces blended into a sustained noise that was almost musical, rhythmic without being regular, constant without being monotonous. Mew would sometimes close its eyes during heavy rain, listening to the world being washed clean, everything dripping and flowing, and temporarily transformed by water's presence. When rain finally stopped, the transition was gradual. Heavy downpour became moderate shower, became light, drizzle became isolated drops, became nothing. Clouds thinned without disappearing entirely, allowing filtered sunlight to return before full brightness emerged. The world after rain felt renewed somehow, not actually changed, but seeming fresher, colors appearing slightly more vivid, air smelling of moisture and earth, everything glistening with retained water, slowly evaporating back into atmosphere. Mew would drift through post-rain landscapes, observing how quickly life resumed its normal patterns. Birds emerged from shelter, shaking water from feathers before taking flight. Ground-dwelling Pokémon returned to interrupted activities, picking up where they had paused when rain began. Flowers heavy with collected water drooped lower under the added weight, gradually lifting again as drops fell or evaporated. Within hours, little evidence remained that rain had fallen at all, except for puddles in low points that would persist until sun dried them completely. Seasons changed in those early days, just as they do now, though without names to distinguish them. Periods of warmth when growth exploded and life felt abundant gave way to periods of cooling when activity slowed and preparation for dormancy began. Some Pokémon adapted by changing behavior, eating more to build reserves, finding secure locations for long sleeps that would carry them through cold months. Others adapted by migrating, moving to regions where warmth persisted year-round, following temperatures rather than enduring their fluctuations. Mew experienced all seasons without particular preference. Cold did not chill its small body. Heat did not exhaust it. Abundance did not excite it more than scarcity. Each season brought different qualities to the world, and Mew observed those qualities with equal interest. Bare branches against winter sky had their own beauty distinct from leaves in summer abundance. Flowers blooming in spring offered different visual pleasures than seeds dispersing in autumn. None was superior to others. All were simply variations on the theme of time passing. During colder seasons, when some Pokémon entered hibernation and others simply reduced activity to conserve energy, the world became quieter. Fewer creatures moved through forests. Less sound-filled air. Even wind seemed to blow more gently, as if understanding that harshness would be unwelcome when everything was already struggling against cold. Mew would drift through these quieter landscapes, appreciating the stillness, the sense that the world had paused to rest before resuming full activity when warmth returned. Sometimes Mew would find hibernating Pokémon in their winter shelters. Creatures curled tight in caves or hollow trees, breathing so slowly their bodies barely moved. Existing in states between life and death, not quite either, suspended in preservation until seasonal change made waking worthwhile. Mew would hover nearby briefly, observing their profound stillness, the trust implicit in shutting down so completely, the faith that spring would arrive and waking would be possible when it did. Other times, Mew would encounter Pokémon that remained active despite cold. Their bodies adapted to continue functioning when others could not. Creatures with thick fur or internal heat generation, or simply stubborn refusal to slow down. They moved through frozen landscapes efficiently, hunting or foraging or traveling, making cold seem irrelevant through sheer determination. Mew observed these too, noting their different adaptation strategies, the various solutions evolution had provided to the same environmental challenge. Time continued its progression, years becoming decades, becoming centuries, all of it blending together in memory that was not quite memory, because memory implies storage and retrieval, and Mew simply existed continuously without needing to store anything. The present was always present. The past receded without disappearing entirely. The future remained potential, waiting to become actual. All three existed simultaneously in Mew's awareness, none prioritized over others. During this extended existence, Mew witnessed countless individual stories begin and end. A Pokémon hatching from an egg, struggling out of protective shell into bright world. The same Pokémon weeks later, stronger, learning to hunt or fly or swim depending on its nature. Months after that, fully grown, perhaps partnered, perhaps alone, living its life according to instinct and adaptation. Years later, older, slower, eventually ceasing, returning to Earth as nutrients that would feed new growth. Mew observed all these cycles without particular emotion. They were not tragic or beautiful or meaningful in ways that required interpretation. They simply were. The natural progression of life in a world where life was temporary, even when it felt permanent. Mew's own existence, extending beyond individual lifespans, provided perspective that made each cycle seem both significant and insignificant simultaneously. Each life mattered while happening. None mattered beyond their own boundaries. The jungles where Mew spent much of its existence changed gradually over long periods. Trees that had been young grew massive, their trunks thickening, their roots spreading, their canopies expanding to shade ground that had once received direct sunlight. Other trees weakened, their wood rotting from inside, their branches dropping in storms, their eventual collapse creating clearings that filled with different plants, starting new cycles of growth and dominance. Mew witnessed these transformations the way one witnesses a river flowing, aware that constant movement was happening, but unable to pinpoint exact moments of change. The jungle was always the jungle, yet never quite the same jungle twice. Each visit revealed minor differences that accumulated into major shifts when compared across years. A path that once existed would be overgrown or washed away. A landmark tree would be gone, its space occupied by multiple younger trees. A stream that had flowed in one direction would have altered course, finding easier routes to lower elevations. None of these changes troubled Mew. Transformation was natural. Stability was an illusion created by insufficient observation periods. Everything changed constantly, and in changing constantly, maintained overall balance. The jungle remained jungle, whether composed of these specific trees or those ones, whether water flowed here or there, whether this clearing existed or that one. The details were interchangeable. The essence persisted. There were moments, rare but memorable even to consciousness, that did not prioritize memories, when Mew encountered phenomena that seemed unusual even by standards of a world full of unusual things. Lights in the sky that were not stars or sun or moon, moving with intention that suggested guidance rather than random drift. Sounds that had no visible source, reverberating through air or ground or water, felt more than heard. Presences that were not quite physical, occupying space without displacing it, aware without having eyes. Mew approached these anomalies with curiosity rather than caution. It would drift closer, examining them without touching, observing without interfering. Sometimes the phenomena would respond to Mew's attention, acknowledging observation by subtle shifts in behavior or appearance. Other times they remained unchanged, either unaware of being watched or indifferent to observation. Eventually, Mew would drift away, carrying no conclusions about what it had witnessed, simply adding the experience to accumulation of experiences that composed its existence. The world was full of mysteries in those early days. Not mysteries that demanded solving, but mysteries that enriched existence by remaining mysterious. Why did certain flowers only bloom at night? What caused the ground to shake occasionally without apparent reason? Where did migrating Pokémon go when they disappeared from familiar territories? And how did they navigate back when seasons changed? These questions existed without urgency. Answers would be interesting if discovered, but non-answers were equally acceptable. Mew embodied this acceptance of mystery completely. It was itself one of the world's great mysteries, a presence that appeared without announcement, moved without sound, existed without aging, observed without judging. Other Pokémon who encountered Mew could not explain what they had seen, could not describe it adequately to others, even if they had possessed language for describing. Mew was experienced rather than understood, felt rather than analyzed, remembered vaguely rather than recorded precisely. Perhaps this is why legends would eventually form around Mew, though legends were still distant in future when words existed to carry stories beyond direct experience. The foundation for those legends was being laid in these early moments, each encounter with Mew creating impressions that would persist somehow, passing from generation to generation in ways that did not require language or teaching, a sense that something existed beyond normal existence, a feeling that the world contained more than could be fully grasped, an awareness that mystery itself was valuable. Time dissolved boundaries between day and night, season and season, year and year. Mew continued drifting, observing, existing. Its presence remained constant even as everything around it changed. Pokémon evolved into more forms. Landscapes transformed under pressure of weather and time. The world itself matured, moving from the rawness of creation toward the complexity of established systems. Through all of this, Mew remained essentially unchanged. Not because it was rigid or inflexible, but because it had already been complete from the beginning. There was nothing to add to what Mew was, nothing to subtract that would not diminish it fundamentally. Mew represented a kind of perfect balance, existence without excess, presence without pressure, awareness without anxiety. The energy that composed Mew, though no one yet understood this in technical terms, held something fundamental. It was not that Mew contained all other Pokémon within itself, but rather that Mew represented the baseline from which variation emerged. Like clear water before anything has been dissolved into it, like white light before being split into spectrum, like silence before sound gives it shape and meaning. This quality made Mew both ordinary and extraordinary simultaneously. Ordinary because it was simply itself without pretension or exaggeration. Extraordinary because itself included potential for everything else. A creature that could become without ceasing to be. An existence that contained all possibilities while remaining singular. A presence that was both answer and question, neither requiring the other to be complete. When Mew rested, which it did, often though not from exhaustion, it would find places where balance felt most apparent. A branch extending over water, positioned exactly between earth and sky, between solid and liquid, between above and below. A cave entrance where light and darkness met without either dominating, where inside and outside felt equally accessible. A clearing where forest opened just enough to reveal sky, but not enough to lose the sense of enclosure trees provided. In these balanced spaces, Mew would settle into stillness that approached meditation, though meditation suggests effort, and Mew's stillness required none. It simply stopped moving and existed in stopping, fully present in non-movement, the way it was fully present in movement. Eyes half closed or fully open made no difference. Awareness continued regardless of eyelid position. During these extended rests, the world would continue around Mew without requiring its participation. Wind moved leaves, water flowed in its channels. Pokémon hunted or hid or slept or played, each following internal drives that needed no external coordination. Everything functioned perfectly well without Mew doing anything, which was exactly as it should be. Mew's presence was not necessary for the world's operation. It was simply additional, one more element in an already complete composition. Sometimes other Pokémon would approach while Mew rested, curious about this small, still figure that radiated no threat but also no welcome. They would come close enough to observe clearly, tilting heads to examine Mew from different angles, trying to categorize what they were seeing according to frameworks that had no category for Mew. Eventually, their curiosity satisfied or patience exhausted, they would move on, leaving Mew exactly as they found it. These encounters never troubled Mew's rest. Being observed felt no different than not being observed. Attention from others added nothing, required nothing, changed nothing. Mew existed whether witnessed or not, whether understood or not, whether remembered or forgotten. Existence was independent of external validation. Hours would pass in this stillness. The sun would move across sky, altering shadow patterns, changing which surfaces received direct light and which fell into shade. Temperature would shift slightly as day progressed toward evening or night, transitioned toward dawn. Moisture levels in air would fluctuate as dew formed or evaporated. All these changes registered in Mew's awareness without disrupting its rest. The world was always changing. Rest did not require change to stop. Eventually, some internal signal would suggest that stillness had served its purpose. Mew would lift again, resuming movement as naturally as it had paused, without transition period between rest and activity. One moment still, the next moment floating, the shift instantaneous and seamless. This was Mew's nature, to exist fully in whatever state it currently occupied, never preparing for the next state, never lingering in the previous one. Direction after rest was never predetermined. Mew might drift in completely opposite direction from its previous path, or continue along the same general heading, or spiral upward to high altitudes, or descend toward water. Choice seemed to happen without choosing, movement without decision, direction without destination. Mew went where going led, trusting that anywhere was as interesting as anywhere else. The concept of home never applied to Mew. Home suggests a place to return to, a location that anchors existence, a spot that feels more right than other spots. Mew had no such place. Every location was temporary occupation, equally valid, equally comfortable, equally unmemorable once left behind. Home was wherever Mew currently floated. Home was nowhere. Both statements were accurate because both described the same reality from different perspectives. This homelessness was not loneliness or rootlessness. It was freedom from attachment to location. Mew could not be lost because it was never trying to be found. It could not be displaced because it belonged to no place specifically, and therefore belonged to every place generally. The entire world was available always, and Mew used that availability fully, never limiting itself to familiar territories or safe zones. Occasionally, Mew would witness births. A Pokémon emerging from egg, breaking through shell that had protected it through development, first experiencing air and light, and the overwhelming vastness of world beyond containment. The newly hatched creature would be vulnerable, dependent, uncoordinated, barely able to maintain balance or focus vision. Yet even in this fragile state, it already was what it would become, its nature evident in its first movements, its future visible in its current form. Mew observed these births with the same gentle curiosity it brought to everything else. New life was not more special than existing life, but it was different, carrying fresh potential, unburdened by experience that might constrain future choices. The hatchling did not yet know what it could or could not do. Everything was still possible. This openness would narrow as experience accumulated, but for now, in these first moments, the creature was as close to unlimited as physical existence allowed. Parent Pokémon, when present, would attend to hatchlings with varying degrees of care. Some species invested enormous energy in protection and teaching, staying close for extended periods, demonstrating behaviors the young would need to survive. Others provided minimal assistance, perhaps ensuring the hatchling could move and breathe, then leaving it to develop independently. Neither approach was better. Both were strategies refined through countless generations. Both produced creatures capable of continuing their species. Mew never intervened in these processes. It did not assist struggling hatchlings or protect vulnerable young from predators. The urge to help, if Mew even felt such urges, was overridden by deeper understanding that intervention would disrupt natural patterns. Every creature faced challenges appropriate to its nature. Success or failure at meeting those challenges determined which traits passed to future generations. Mew's interference, however well-intentioned, would corrupt this system. So Mew watched without helping, observed without acting, witnessed without interfering. This was perhaps the hardest form of compassion. Allowing suffering when alleviating it would be simple, permitting failure when ensuring success would be easy. But true compassion required recognizing that every creature deserved to face its own challenges, to earn its own survival, to claim its own victories, or accept its own defeats. Death happened frequently in those early days, as it does in all days. Pokémon fell to predators or disease or simple bad luck, being in wrong place when disaster struck. Their bodies returned to Earth, becoming nutrients that fueled new growth, closing loops that made life cyclical rather than linear. Energy transferred from one form to another, never lost, just transformed. Mew encountered death regularly, finding bodies in various states of decay, sometimes fresh, sometimes ancient, all serving as temporary markers for where life had ceased. The bodies did not disturb Mew. They were simply matter transitioning between states, no different than water becoming ice or ice becoming water. The essence that had animated these bodies was gone, relocated to wherever essence goes, leaving behind only physical structure that would gradually collapse and disperse. Sometimes Mew would pause near recent deaths, observing the stillness that was different from sleep's stillness. Sleep suggested temporary pause, breathing that would resume, eyes that would open. Death suggested permanence, an ending that would not reverse, a departure that was final. The difference was subtle but absolute. Sleeping Pokémon carried potential for waking. Dead Pokémon carried potential for transformation into something else entirely. These observations of death did not sadden Mew. Sadness required attachment, investment in particular outcomes, preference for continuation over cessation. Mew had none of these. Death was simply another part of existence, neither good nor bad, neither tragic nor fortunate. It was necessary for balance, for creating space that new life could occupy, for preventing overpopulation that would strain resources beyond sustainability. Death was life's partner, not its opposite. As centuries accumulated, though centuries were not counted, patterns emerged that would later be recognized as evolution in the broader sense. Not individual transformation, but species-level change across generations. Pokémon that had appeared one way gradually appeared slightly different. Adaptations emerging in response to environmental pressures, traits being selected for or against based on survival value. Mew witnessed these shifts without understanding their mechanisms. A species that had been predominantly one color slowly shifting toward another. Pokémon that had possessed certain features developing enhanced or reduced versions of those features. Entirely new forms appearing, branched off from existing species, different enough to be distinct, yet similar enough to show common origin. These changes happened too slowly for single lifespans to notice, but Mew's extended existence made them visible. The world was not static. Life was not fixed. Everything was constantly experimenting, testing variations, discovering what worked better or worse in current conditions. Most experiments failed, those creatures not surviving long enough to reproduce. But some succeeded, passing their innovations to offspring, gradually altering what that species meant. Through all these observations, Mew remained central to nothing. It was not directing evolution or guiding changes or selecting which traits would persist. It was simply present, drifting alongside transformations that were happening with or without observation. The world did not need Mew watching to continue its experiments. But Mew watched anyway, because watching was what Mew did, and existence was what provided things to watch. The playfulness that defined much of Mew's character expressed itself in small ways. Sometimes Mew would mimic other Pokémon's movements, copying their walking patterns or flight styles or swimming techniques, not to mock them, but simply to experience movement from their perspective. A heavy-bodied Pokémon's ponderous gait became Mew's ponderous float. A bird's rapid wing beats became Mew's quick directional changes. A fish's undulating swim became Mew's sinuous drift. These imitations were temporary games Mew played with itself. Entertainment that required no audience. The copied movements would be maintained briefly, perhaps for minutes or hours, then abandoned as Mew returned to its natural floating drift. The game complete, the experience absorbed, Mew moved on without dwelling on what it had just done. Other times, playfulness manifested as unnecessary complexity in simple actions. Traveling from one point to another, Mew might take elaborate route, spiraling around trees, diving beneath streams, rising high above canopy, all to cover distance that could have been crossed directly in moments. The journey became more interesting than the arrival. The path became more engaging than the destination. This playfulness was never frantic or desperate. It did not suggest boredom seeking relief or emptiness seeking filling. It was simply expression of joy in movement, pleasure in having body capable of motion, appreciation for a world that provided infinite space for movement to happen within. Mew played because playing felt natural, and natural feelings were honored rather than suppressed or questioned. Sometimes Mew would play with objects rather than movements. A leaf falling from tree would be caught mid-fall, held suspended in air, released to continue falling, caught again, released again. Each capture and release executed with precision that made the action appear choreographed rather than spontaneous. The leaf, indifferent to being played with, would eventually reach ground when Mew tired of the game, none the worse for having been briefly entertainment. Other objects received similar treatment. A floating seed pod might be nudged gently, sent drifting in new direction, nudged again when it slowed, creating patterns in air that lasted only as long as attention maintained them. A stone might be lifted from riverbed, examined from all angles while water flowed around its absence, then carefully returned to exact position it had occupied, leaving no evidence of disturbance. These small interactions represented Mew's gentlest form of engagement with the world. Not aggressive or possessive, not claiming or consuming, just briefly borrowing objects for temporary play before returning them undamaged. The world tolerated these small loans because they cost nothing and harmed none. A few moments of play, then everything back as it was. As time stretched further, approaching lengths that would eventually be measured in geological terms rather than biological ones, Mew's existence achieved a quality that might be described as eternal, if eternity means unchanging continuity rather than infinite duration. Each moment was new, yet each moment was also familiar. Nothing truly surprised Mew anymore, because everything was variation on patterns already observed countless times. This familiarity did not breed contempt or boredom. It bred comfort, the deep ease of existing in a world whose fundamental nature was known and accepted. Mew had seen enough births to understand that births continued. Enough deaths to know that death remained constant companion to life. Enough transformations to recognize that change was the only stable element in existence, otherwise defined by flux. Yet even within this familiarity, small surprises remained. A particular shade of sunset that was somehow unique despite millions of sunsets already witnessed. A specific bird call that arranged familiar sounds in novel pattern. A storm that moved differently than previous storms, following routes that contradicted typical weather patterns. These minor variations kept existence interesting without disrupting its fundamental predictability. Mew's relationship with the world had evolved into something approaching perfect balance. It took nothing the world did not freely offer. It demanded nothing the world could not easily provide. It disturbed nothing that preferred remaining undisturbed. It existed alongside everything else, parallel rather than intersecting, present without being imposing. This balance might be what made Mew important, though importance is a difficult concept to apply to something that did not seek importance or require it. Mew represented possibility of existence without exploitation, presence without pressure, observation without judgment. In a world where almost every interaction involved taking or being taken from, Mew simply was, neither predator nor prey, neither dominant nor submissive, neither leader nor follower. The genetic potential within Mew, still undiscovered and unnamed, represented similar balance. Ability to become anything without needing to become any specific thing. Potential held in perfect suspension, never manifesting unless circumstances made manifestation necessary. This was not indecision or weakness. This was ultimate flexibility, strength found in refusing to be limited to any single expression of strength. As our story drifts further into time, as Mew continues its eternal floating through world that is always changing while remaining essentially unchanged, perhaps it is time to let go of following so closely. Mew's journey has no endpoint to reach. Its existence has no climax to build toward. It simply continues moment after moment, day after day, year after year, each moment complete in itself, none requiring connection to larger narrative. Imagine Mew now, floating somewhere in deep jungle, soft pink form barely visible among green leaves and brown branches, its eyes half closed, observing without intense focus, its tail swaying gently in rhythm that has no external source, just internal timing that guides movement. Its small body suspended in air that holds it effortlessly, gravity suggesting it should fall, but somehow never insisting strongly enough to actually bring it down. Around Mew, the jungle breathes. Leaves rustle in wind that never quite stops. Insects hum their constant single note. Water moves somewhere nearby, stream or river or rain collecting in hollows. Birds call occasionally, marking territory or seeking mates, or simply expressing being alive and capable of sound. All of this happening simultaneously, overlapping, creating symphony that has played continuously since before sound had listeners. Mew exists within this symphony without adding to it significantly. Its presence is note so quiet that removing it would not noticeably change the song. Yet, it is there, has always been there, will continue being there as long as the song plays. Neither central nor peripheral, neither essential nor superfluous. Just present, just existing, just being itself in world that has always had space for it. The afternoon light filtering through canopy catches Mew's fur briefly, making it appear to glow faintly before shadow returns and glow disappears. The moment passes. Other moments arrive to replace it. Time continues its steady progression, caring nothing for individuals within its flow, treating all equally, moving forward without pause or reflection. Perhaps Mew will drift toward water soon, or perhaps it will remain here longer, or perhaps it will spiral upward toward open sky. The decision, if it can be called decision, has not been made yet because decision-making happens just before action, rather than in advance. Mew exists in present, responding to present, unburdened by plans for future or regrets about past. This is the origin of Mew, not in sense of where it came from or when it first appeared, but in sense of what it means to exist as Mew exists, without agenda or urgency, without attachment or avoidance, without purpose beyond being present to whatever is currently happening. Origin as ongoing state rather than past event. Origin as way of being rather than point of beginning. Let your thoughts become like Mew's awareness now. Observing what arrives in consciousness without grasping at interesting thoughts or pushing away unpleasant ones. Letting everything drift through, noticed but not caught, present but not permanent. Each breath is complete in itself, like each moment of Mew's existence. Each exhale releases what is no longer needed, like Mew drifting away from places it has finished observing. The jungle sounds around Mew continue, perhaps becoming quieter, or perhaps just seeming quieter as attention softens. The constant hum remains, less as sound and more as texture. Underlying presence that proves world is still here, still functioning, still breathing its slow breath that requires no effort and no thought. Mew's eyes have closed now, or perhaps they have not. It makes no difference. In darkness or in light, in sleep or in waking, in movement or in stillness, Mew continues being Mew. The boundary between sleeping and waking feels less distinct than it seemed moments ago. Perhaps there is no boundary. Perhaps there is just continuous existence, wearing different qualities depending on perspective. The origin continues, has always continued, will always continue, Mew drifting through time that is not measured, through space that is not mapped, through existence that requires no explanation or justification. Simply being, simply present, simply here. Let yourself drift alongside Mew now, floating without effort, observing without strain, existing without needing existence to mean anything beyond existing. The world holds you as it holds Mew, effortlessly, asking nothing in return, providing space that is always available, always sufficient, always exactly what is needed. The jungle breathes around you both. Time moves forward without hurry. Moment follows moment, each one different, all of them same. Everything that needs to happen is happening. Everything that needs to be is being. Nothing is missing, nothing is wrong, nothing requires fixing or changing or improving. Just drifting now, just floating, just being. Like Mew has always been, like you are now becoming, like the world has always suggested was possible if only you stopped trying long enough to notice the invitation. The story continues without words now, without images, without anything except the gentle sensation of existing, without needing existence to go anywhere or do anything, or become anything other than what it already is. Here, in this moment, everything is complete. Everything is balanced. Everything is exactly as it should be. The origin of Mew was never a beginning. It is the continuous present. And the continuous present is where we all exist. Always. Now, here. Thank you for drifting through this legend with me. If this story helped you find peace tonight, please consider subscribing to Sleep Powder Stories and leaving a like. Your support means more than you know. Sleep well, and may your dreams be as gentle as Mew's endless journey.